and gentlemen, welcome to the future. As you all know by now, I'm Zach Gardner, the chief architect at Keyhole Software. And I decided that about 6, 7 months ago, I simply just did not know enough about generative AI. I didn't even know enough to be dangerous. I didn't even know enough to be not dangerous. And I felt that it behooved me, that's my word for the day, behooved, that I needed to go out. I needed to learn from people that have been thinking about this longer than I have. Some people have been implementing generative AI into production for about a year now. Some people are like me, and they're just still trying to find their way through Plato's cave, trying to discern the shadows from the real forms of things. So I went out and I had a number of different people that I could have talked to. But today with me on the program, Mark Herschberg is the author of the Career Toolkit and very apropos product placement, by the way. It's like right over your shoulder for those that are on just the video and the audio. So thank you very much for being with me today. Appreciate it, dude.
Thank you for having me on the show. It is my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So the disclaimer I always like to put in, just in case anyone is listening and they get a little wild hair. All the views and opinions expressed in this program are the views and opinions of the participants and do not reflect their employer, their trade organizations, any book clubs that they are affiliated with, any fitness clubs, any yoga studios. It's just two guys. We're just talking. That's all. That's all this is. So to get us started off with, can you give a little bit of a background into your career? What are some of the interesting companies that you work for? What has your career path been like? Has it been linear or has it been, non-linear, like most of us? And what motivated you to jump off that bridge and decide to write a book? I guess we'll get started there.
It has been linear and nonlinear.
Good.
It has been both, as I'll explain. I graduated from MIT back in the 90s. I did my undergraduate there. I did my graduate work in cryptography and started out during the dot-com era. I've done a number of tech companies. I'll circle back to that because that's going to be relevant here. But I realized early on I wanted to become a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. I recognized that the skills I would need to be successful weren't taught to me. Yes, I needed to be a good engineer, and I had some of that. But the other skills, leadership, team building, communication, hiring, networking, negotiating, I heard of these, but no one ever taught them to me. So I had to develop the skills in myself. And we didn't have podcasts and all these great other resources we have today. I realized as I was doing it, my whole team would benefit. So I began to upskill my team. And as I did that, so that path from engineer to CTO has been somewhat linear. But as I was upskilling, MIT had gotten feedback. Companies said, we want these skills in everyone we hire, not just your students, not just undergrads, everyone, and we can't find them. So when I heard MIT wanted to put together a program on this, I reached out. I thought, here, take my content, maybe it will help. I said, not so fast, and they pulled me in to help develop more content. And I said, okay, great, now you have content, good luck. I said, nope, you still can't leave. Please help us teach. So in parallel, I've had this other path, teaching at MIT and a few other schools, but MIT consistently for over 20 years, teaching these skills to our students. And that led to the book, unexpectedly. The book is not just for engineers, not just for undergrads. It takes those ideas, but we more broadly cover them for anyone in the corporate world. And then the book also led to the Brain Bump app, because I recognized there was a challenge in that you read a book like that or you listen to a podcast like this, but it quickly fades from memory. So how can we help people retain that information? And I created the Brain Bump app as well. So I've been linear in my career, but I've had these two other linear paths as well with the book and speaking, and then now the app as well. And just to close the loop, so within that tech career, it's been a number of different industries. Cybersecurity is my core. That's what I was trained on. But I live in New York City. I've done a lot of media and ad tech and lead gen. I've built a number of double-sided markets, 3 of them labor markets, a few of them lead gen or other types of marketplaces. I spent a year at Harvard Business School working with some finance professors, understanding market theory and building out some training software for them. I've helped a couple Fortune 500s play startup. They brought me in because they wanted to be innovative and use new technologies and create some rapid, quick, high wins, and their structure wasn't set up for it. And I've been doing big data and AI ML since the 90s. My first job once I left MIT was building OLAP systems in the 90s. It's a giant hypercube database. Back then we didn't call it big data, but that's what it was. And so I've built a number of data-driven products. I've run data science teams and product teams as well. And I have a number of patents, some of which do employ AI.
Very, very interesting. Um, just for the listeners out there that have been to the city before, do you prefer chicken over rice with the white sauce and the red sauce? Just the white sauce? Like, this is very important to the podcast. Like, what is your opinion on the proper way to enjoy chicken over rice? It's got to be in the plastic container, the cellophane containers.
I'm more likely to have an Eero, but if I am
Uh,
getting chicken over rice, and notice I said Eero, there's
yep, you said
also
it correctly.
gyro and gyro. It just depends where you're from. And I grew up New York and New Jersey and Chicago, so I've gotten different pronunciations.
Mhm.
But if I'm getting chicken on rice, I actually tend to eat it plain, neither
Fair.
sauce. I know, very controversial.
Interesting. I was earlier this week I was interviewing the inventor of the App Store who actually lives on the Upper West Side, and he was a white and red sauce kind of guy. So you can tell a lot about a person by how they take their chicken over rice. All right. Let's get back to, this has been good good little aside, but we got to give the people what they want. They're here. They come for the chicken over rice, but they stay for the AI. So, talk to me a little bit about what your experience has been with in the generative AI space. How are you using it in your personal life? How are you using it in your professional life? And maybe what are some of the recommendations that you can provide to the audience for some things that they need to be thinking about before they even start embarking on this journey?
In my personal life, and here it's blurring a little, I put out a blog post every week, actually two blog posts per week these days. And what I found, we know that images really make your blog posts and articles better, more likely to be clicked on. I respect copyright, so I would not take someone's copywritten image. I was going to public domain images, I was going to Unsplash. But the great thing with generative AI is I can get exactly the image that captures what I want faster than it would take me to find a only so-so image on these other sites. And that's been a game changer, I think. That's probably the only way I use it personally. I do not use it in my writing. Not that it's writing the article, but just to give them inspiration. But now professionally, that's where I use it more often. I do have some patents that take not just other types of AI, but generative AI as a key component of the patent. And I've got two companies right now that I'm working with where AI is a key part of it. One example, I'm involved with a company called Coverage IQ. And what we do is we're a plugin for Salesforce. If you are a good salesperson, not the spam that you and I probably get 20 times a day, but a good salesperson does research on the company. I don't mean where you get the, hey, I see you're at this company, you're doing cool work, please buy our stuff. But they say, I've been reading your SEC filings, I've been reading the reports your company's pulling out, I see what's happening in the company, and given this initiative, here's how our tool or service can help you achieve that goal. But that's a lot of work, literally tens of hours of work. The people I'm working with will tell me they would spend 15 to 20 hours doing research and composing a very targeted email. Thanks to generative AI, with our tool, we can source that information, we can summarize it, and help the salesperson go through potentially hundreds of articles, find the most relevant topics, and draft a version of the email that ties into this. It's not going to be the finished email. We always say you, the human, should tweak it. But we just took tens of hours and dropped it to tens of minutes.
Interesting. That would be very compelling. And yes, I get plenty of those too. I run a software development shop and I get emails of like being like, hey, I run a software development shop. Can I help you? And it's like, you clearly did no research about
Yep.
like what it is that we do on a daily basis. Like, no thanks, stop, opt out, opt out, opt out. Uh, it's interesting that you mentioned, being able to take tens or 20s, a score. In fact, I love using scores as a unit of measurement. It's 20 for those of you that don't know. Being able to reduce the amount of time that it takes you or I or an SDR out there to be able to do this research and enable human to human communication. I think that's one of the things that so often is overlooked when we're talking about generative AI. Things that used to take us long cycles, lots of legwork, lots of, sweat equity, so to speak, to be able to get these things ready. We can summarize that. We can get that down to like 10, 15, 20 minutes. Now, you still, I would say, even in that tool, it's probably more of like a recommendation. It's like you still probably want to make sure that the information is like valid and accurate, because hallucinations are, uh, they're just part and parcel of what it means to be a generative AI system. Very much like you can't have a Pop Tart without having the filling, so to speak. So I'm curious how how you think of hallucinations, how you deal with hallucinations, and is it just something that we need to be trained on for the next generation that is going to be using these tools, or are they just going to have to, this is going to be part of their upbringing, their scar tissue, so to speak?
This is a really interesting topic. For hallucinations in this particular tool, the key is finding an LLM that can tie it back to the source. So if you ask, what's the Iida,
Mhm.
instead of just saying, okay, it said this and maybe it's right, maybe it's not, or now I have to go look it up. Certain tools can actually cite, here is where in the article I got it. And so you can either, as a human, verify it, or we can then have code just say, look here, do we see that number where it says? And if so, okay, that's the Iida. If not, we flag it and say, maybe you really need to look into this. But I think hallucinations, this is a larger issue of which hallucinations is one part. And here's something I'm really concerned about with society in general. We know there's garbage on the internet, and that's just humanity. There is good and bad, and there's people who raise us up, and there's people who pull us down. What has happened is, first, by connecting everyone on the internet, we have taken those small voices on the edge. Let's take flat earthers as an example. And by combining together, they become more powerful. Now, there's other advantages. We have small groups of disenfranchised people who can come together and be more powerful in a good way, but also some of these fringe elements with less noble ideas gain that type of power and authority too. The difference is when we look online, you and I might see a friend post something about, hey, is the earth really flat? And we'd say, no, and here's evidence, and here's all the different types of proof. Trust me, go do it yourself, whatever it takes. And we'll probably give up after that. But the flat earthers or others with these conspiracy theories will spend all sorts of, they're really committed to it. And they'll spend all weekend long arguing and posting, and here's why your theories are wrong, and you're part of the big round earth conspiracy cabal. Well, we just gave them a much bigger amplifier, because now instead of doing one post in an hour or in an afternoon, they can do 100.
Mhm.
They can do 1,000. We can automate this, and they can flood the internet. And you and I aren't going to spend our time doing 1,000 posts on why this is all wrong. We don't care that much, but they feel so passionate. These people get involved in these conspiracy theories that they will put the time in and they will use these tools. And the internet is going to be flooded with misinformation. Now, yes, this is not a hallucination because someone intentionally did this, but the point is the volume of incorrect information we are going to see in society is going to grow 100-fold or more. And that's going to be problematic because the signal to noise ratio that we get on the internet is going to drop even further than it already is. We will need tools to help filter this. and I'm working on that with a different company I'm a part of. We will also need to teach the next generation better skills for sourcing and understanding information. I am old enough, and I think you might be as well, that I remember doing reports in middle school and high school, and we'd go to the library, and the librarian would teach us about research and primary sources versus secondary sources, and why you have to cite your sources, and why hearsay isn't as valid as, for example, a primary source. And that was really important, and most people, I think, have forgotten it. And now we're on the internet, and we say, oh, well, here's some random web page, so it must be true. And this has decreased the quality of information online. That's about to get much, much worse.
Mhm. No, I do remember having to go to. I also did a debate in high school and having to go and research through books. So I appreciate the compliment, though. I the secret is finding a really nice moisturizer. Anyway, uh, being able to have your large language model prompted to ask it for the sources. Retrieval augmented generation is, somewhat similar to what you were describing of, putting in all the K10s, I think that's what those are called, where it's like all the filings to the SEC,
Okay,
being able
yeah.
to comb through it. Because otherwise, your large language model is liable to it's designed to be authoritative. It's designed to be like Moses still with a glowing face coming down from Mount Sinai, projecting of like this is the truth. This is what you need to know. And it's helpful to have it be like, okay, like this is what you think is true. Can you tell me where you got it? And so there's a fair amount of training that we need, that the next generation is just going to have in order to appropriately use those tools. I don't think it's too dissimilar from training people not to click on spammy links, to make sure that before you enter in your bank information that it's on an HTTPS instead of an HTTP site. But it's still an emerging technique. It's still an emerging part of the zeitgeist that I don't think has like fully captured the imagination and the attention of the audience. Prompt engineering, though, we were kind of talking about this in the green room beforehand. Prompt engineering is something that I heard coming out maybe about this time last year, and there were supposed to be thousands of jobs that were created for these prompt engineers. I'm curious your take on it, and am I just missing these job postings, or do these actually not exist?
First, I just want to note you likened the training to training not to click this link, not to go for the spam, like for HTTPS. And yet, how often do we still do that? The training
Mhm.
is far from perfect, and we're going to have the same problem here. Now, you raised prompt engineering, and you're right. We're recording this in the spring of 2024. It was spring of 2023 when Gen AI and ChatGPT really started getting into the general public's mind, and people were talking about prompt engineering. So let's understand why prompt engineering was so exciting. You and I have formal education, have training in software, and it's a well-paying industry. AI is well-paying even within the industry. That is the hot, that is the sexy, that's where the big bucks are. Generally, you need people, maybe you have a PhD or maybe years of software experience to be able to get those high-paying jobs. And you have the haves and the have-nots. But wait, prompt engineering. Here's a job. It doesn't require any training. In fact, there is no formal training. This is brand new. You can get in on the ground floor, and you, with only a high school education, can work in AI and get the big bucks. How is that not exciting? Of course, everyone wants to do this. And so, what happens in the media? They say, oh, people are excited about this. They're clicking on these articles. Everyone wants to know how I can shortcut, skip all that hard work and education, but get the big AI bucks. That's why everyone got excited about prompt engineering. In the fall, I did some research on this. It was about 6 months into the hype. And I looked and said, where are these jobs? Because I don't believe we're going to have these jobs for reasons I will explain. At the time, late September 2023, Upwork had 3 jobs when I searched for prompt engineering, just 3. Indeed, when I searched without a location, had 8 jobs. Nationally within the US, 8 prompt engineering jobs, 6 months after all the hype. When I search for prompt engineering just in the Bay Area, the heart of tech in the US, it returned only one job. LinkedIn, 13 jobs across the entire US. Now, these were prompt engineering jobs, not jobs for software engineers where prompt engineering may have been one of 17 other requirements, but it's also coding and other stuff. There were no prompt engineering jobs. The only place where I saw them listed, there was a website. I'm not going to give the URL because I think it's a little sketchy. There's a website for prompt engineering jobs that had 82 jobs listed, but most of them were not actually prompt engineering jobs. Most of them were software engineering jobs, and they were from months ago. So why aren't there actually these jobs that everyone was telling us there were supposed to be? Again, the hype, the desire, but why it's not real is because it's not that complicated a skill, because the barrier is that low, because anyone can do it. And we're just taking existing people and say, oh, why don't you work on tweaking the prompt a bit? It reminds me, back in the 90s, they talked about search engineers. When web search was big, we're going to need experts to really help you navigate, because there's going to be so much on the World Wide Web, and you're going to need qualified experts to help you find the right information you need among this sea of information. Of course, those never materialized because we got sophisticated enough and search engines improved enough that it's just a skill that a 10-year-old can do. And the same thing will happen to prompt engineering. Within a few years, our own skill set and the increase in improvement in technology means we don't need this job. And so we will not have prompt engineering jobs. They are a mirage.
Mhm. I'm glad I'm not the only one, but you're telling me what, maybe a dozen? I mean, that sounds really exclusive. I bet that very few people can do this work, highly specialized. It's like a neurosurgeon that can also be on a walking treadmill, while they're performing brain surgery, or is it just, I bet these jobs were just, I don't know. I don't want to disparage them too much, but I totally agree with what you're saying. I was talking with the director of a software development training shop, and he was saying that, just like you and I had to learn about assembly, and then we had to learn about higher order languages. We had to learn about memory allocation. And then once we got to languages that did automatic garbage collection, we didn't have to worry about, a malloc and, oh God, what was the opposite of malloc? So like dealloc?
Bialik.
Yeah, man, had some cobwebs that kind of came free there. Every iteration, there's a new skill, a new technique, a new architecture that just becomes part of what it means to be a software developer. And I worry, there's two worries that I think that I have that I'm curious to get your take on. One of them is the next generation of software developers, if the answers are too easily handed to them, if all they have to do is go to GitHub Copilot, clickety clack, you got your whole app, I worry that they're not going to have the right mindset. They're not going to have the right habits developed. They're going to be essentially just, these shapeless forms that just go and move about life that really don't understand and are not building applications that can be maintainable. So that's the first thing. The second, I don't know about you, but I've seen some pretty bad code on the internet. I mean, I've seen some pretty bad code, like, in large companies, which I will not name, but on the internet, like Stack Overflow, GitHub, like there's some not so good ways to do it. And it's not just me. This is me saying it. People say this. And I worry if we have these tools trained on these pieces of code, these functions, and they're not able to discern like what is appropriate, what is maintainable, what is secure, what is performant. The code that these developers are outputting, if they don't have the habits that you and I have developed, if they don't have the common sense of asking, like, well, maybe there's a better way to do this, maybe that's actually not going to be so good. I don't know. I'm curious your take on this. We didn't talk about this. This is fresh, ladies and gentlemen. He was not prompted for this question.
Those are two broad questions. I will try to answer them both. The second piece is the code itself that's not good quality code. When you think about the sea change that an LLM represents, it's the relatively unsupervised training. It's not maybe 100% unsupervised, but we're pretty close to it. And so we were able to just grab stuff from the internet. What happened? Well, we know there's bias out there, and there's all sorts of articles, and we see this in all of our big data discussions, bias against certain groups, certain subsections, and our data contains bias because there was bias in our actions from which the data was derived. Same thing is true here. There's lots of code. Just like we wish we had nothing but unbiased information on the web and then we'd have clean data, but that's not the reality. We wish we had only good code, but that's not the reality. I think we will have a secondary problem, which is the generated code feeds back in and the generate for code or for content. But I also think the way out of it is if we invest a little more and say, don't just train on all the code in GitHub, but invest a certain group of people saying, here's the good code, overweight this code, add a little more supervision, overweight that, then yes, we can get to rise above the mediocre average and lift it up. I think that's possible. Now, to your first question about the quality of developers. First, I'll note we talked about memory allocation. This is a question when I hire developers, I actually ask them how it works, even though we don't have to manually do that. And the reason is the better developers understand what's happening under the hood. If you're a developer, you should understand how it works. You don't have to be a detailed expert. You're not using it every day. But at some point, when you're really trying to scale a system and you have to tweak every bit of performance out of it, understanding how it works under the hood. If we take Java, for example, looking at, are you using a generational collector and what are the parameters of it? This is going to help you tune. If you just need an Uber driver, anyone can do it. But if you're trying to win a motor race, you need a driver who's not just a driver, but knows a car, understands engine timing, understands exactly how these details work so they can get every bit of performance out of it. Now, that said, we don't have to go all the way to assembly. Yes, I learned it, you learned it. I don't remember any of it really, because that's far enough abstracted away from us. I remember having to open in BASIC, open files and write and close the file, and that's abstracted enough away. Memory management is only abstracted one layer away from us. So I think we still need to go down about one layer wherever we are. But to the point of what does an engineer need to know? It's not the mechanics. It's not where do you put the semicolon, because that can be solved for us. Let's take writing. An editor of a book in the 1950s had to correct spelling and grammar and punctuation, but also make sure that the plot worked or that it was coherent or laid out in a logical way. Today, software tools take care of most of the spelling and grammar and punctuation. Still a little of that humans need to do, but we've removed 95% of it. That means the editors can focus more on the plot or the subject matter, and they're focused on the higher value activity. And the same thing will happen with software engineers. We can remove the, where do I put the semicolon? I remember writing setters and getters when I was doing Java back in the 90s. I remember having to write logging subroutines. Well, I don't have to do that because there's open source logging tools for me. We're removing the overhead so I can focus more on that core business logic code. And this happens in every technology. We remove the edges, we remove the grunt work, and people can focus on the higher value work. So I don't think software engineering is going away. The good news is it's lowering the cost of developing, and that's going to make it more accessible and more widespread, increasing the demand.
Absolutely. You know, focusing on higher value activity, being able to solve business problems with technology. If I could spend more of my time doing that and less of my time worrying about queries inside of loops, all the better. So if people want to learn more about you, learn more about your company, where should they go? Which book distributors is your book at?
I'm going to give you two different websites. The first is for the book. You can go to thecareertoolkitbook.com. And on that website, you can learn more about the book, about me, follow me on social media. You can see where to buy it, Amazon, of course, and other places as well. Just follow the buy link. I also put out articles every week, including on AI and technology, its impact on careers, its impact on society, how you can implement AI within your company. We didn't have time to get into that, but I have articles on it. So go to the article section, and all of that is at thecareertoolkitbook.com. I have a second website, brainbumpapp.com, and that's where I have the free learning app. And on that website, you can learn more about it. Follow links to the two stores where you can download it completely free, no ads, no credit card required, and that's at brainbumpapp.com.
Very cool. Well, Mark, it's been real. Thank you so much for coming onto the program. I hope you all learned something. I definitely did. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you in the future.